When the sky burned and the invincible Galactic Coalition fled, they left millions to die. They said it was a tactical necessity, but humanity's 47th Combat Surgical Hospital didn't get the memo. Instead of retreating, they flew straight into the plasma fire. This is why you don't cross human medics. Command bridge of the UNS Nightingale smelled of recycled ozone, stale coffee, and the cold metallic tang of impending doom orbiting the besieged colony world. Of Xyler Prime, the human medical frigate sat on the extreme edge of the Galactic Coalition's defensive formation. For 3 weeks the Coalition had promised the civilian populace and the entrenched ground forces that the line would hold against the advancing Kalan Empire. That promise shattered precisely at 400 hours. Chief Medical Officer Harrison Miller leaned over the tactical holodable, his jaw clenched so tight it sent dull spikes of pain into his temples. He was a veteran of the resource wars back on Earth, a man who had sewn limbs back together in the mud of Eastern Europe and the burning sands of North Africa. He thought he had seen the absolute worst of what sentient beings could do to one another. He was wrong, Dr. Miller. Captain David Rossi said, his voice unusually tight. Rossi, a former hotshot atmospheric pilot who had traded in his fighter wings to fly ambulances, pointed a trembling finger at the display. Look at the fleet telemetry, the Coalition Vanguard. They're breaking formation. Harrison adjusted his glasses, an anachronistic habit he kept because the weight on the bridge of his nose grounded him, and stared at the shimmering blue icons representing the Coalition dreadnoughts. They were massive, city-sized vessels meant to project absolute authority. Now they were realigning their massive impulse drives. They weren't flanking. They were spinning up their slip space drives. They're falling back to the secondary rally point, Harrison asked, though the cold dread pooling in his stomach already knew the answer. No, sir, Rossi replied, his fingers flying across the console. I'm intercepting a wide-band encrypted transmission from Fleet Admiral Takari. It's a full tactical withdrawal. Sector abandonment. They're jumping to the core worlds. Nurse Evelyn Hayes, a tough-as-nails trauma specialist who had been organizing the planetary evacuation protocols for the last 48 hours, dropped the data pad she was holding. It clattered loudly against the deck. Plating. Abandonment. Harrison, there are 2 million civilians. Down there, there's an entire division of Coalition infantry bleeding out in the capital's ruins. We have 60,000 wounded queued for orbital airlift. Harrison didn't answer immediately. He watched the holodable as the Kalan Empire's armada, crimson, jagged, and merciless, tore through the outer defense satellites. The Kalans were a brutal, militaristic species that viewed conquest not as politics but as a biological imperative. They took no prisoners. They offered no quarter. Patch me through to Admiral Takari, Harrison ordered, his voice dropping to a dangerous gravelly register channel. Open, Rossi said. The holographic projection of an avian-like alien flickered to life on the bridge. Admiral Takari looked immaculate, completely untouched by the carnage unfolding 100,000 miles below her. Admiral, Harrison said, skipping protocol, we are seeing your ships prep for slip space. You have not authorized the medevac shuttles to launch from the surface. We have tens of thousands of wounded waiting for transport at Grid Alpha. 9. Dr. Miller of the Human Auxiliary, Takari said, her translated voice sounding clipped and synthetic. The situation has deteriorated beyond acceptable parameters. The Kalan fleet outnumbers us 3-1. If we remain to evacuate the wounded, we risk the destruction of the core fleet. Tactical calculus dictates we cut our losses. The surface is lost. Those aren't losses. Admiral Evelyn snapped, stepping into the hollow field's pickup range. Those are your soldiers, your people. The decision is final. The Nightingale is ordered to join the retreat formation. Immediately, any vessel left behind will be obliterated by the Kalan vanguard. Takari out. The transmission abruptly cut. Silence descended on the bridge of the Nightingale. Through the massive permaglass viewing ports, the sky of Xyler Prime was streaked with the fiery trails of orbital bombardments. The coalition dreadnoughts began to shimmer, the fabric of space bending around them as they jumped away, leaving a gaping hole in the planetary defense grid. They were running. Harrison looked at Evelyn, then at Captain Rossi. He looked at the communication feeds from the ground. Audio channels flooded with the terrified screams of alien soldiers and civilians begging for a dust-off that was never coming. Captain Rossi, Harrison said, his voice eerily calm. What is the structural integrity of this ship in a steep atmospheric dive? Rossi swallowed hard, his dark eyes widening. She's a medical frigate, Doc. She's built like a brick. She can handle the heat, but she's not shielded for entire fire. We dive into that mess, we're a flying target. Evelyn. Harrison turned to his chief nurse. Prep the trauma bays, all of them. Unseal the emergency plasma reserves and spin up the robotic surgical arms. Tell the staff we are about to see a lot of traffic. Harrison, Evelyn said softly, a fierce, terrifying smile breaking across her face. You're actually going to do it. You're going to violate a direct coalition order. Humanity signed the Geneva Convention centuries ago, Harrison said, buttoning his white and red coat over his standard issue uniform. It states that medical personnel do not abandon their patients. I don't give a damn about Takari's tactical calculus. I care about the heartbeat of the poor bastards bleeding out in the mud. Rossi, take us down right into the capital. The Nightingale didn't just break orbit, it plummeted. Captain Rossi cut the main thrusters and pitched the ship's nose straight down toward the gravity well of Xyler Prime. The inertial dampeners shrieked in protest as the massive white-painted vessel hit the upper atmosphere at Mach 20, heat shields at maximum capacity. Rossi yelled over the roaring vibration of the ship, I'm routing all auxiliary power to the structural integrity field. Outside the viewport, the blackness of space instantly transformed into a blinding, roaring wall of fire. The friction of re-entry painted the ship in blazing plasma. But that was the least of their worries. As they punched through the mesosphere, the tactical displays lit up with hundreds of hostile red blips. The Kalan Empire's invasion force had established air superiority. Incoming fire. The tactical officer, Lieutenant Jonathan Weaver, shouted. Kalan interceptors bearing 49 They have a missile lock. They're firing on a marked hospital ship. Evelyn gasped, clinging to a support rail. The Kalans don't recognize the Red Cross. Evie. Harrison barked, bracing himself against the command console. To them, we're just meat in a metal can. Rossi evade. Rossi proved why he was a legend in the Earth Aero Corps. He slammed the lateral thrusters, sending the heavy lumbering frigate into a violent, stomach-churning barrel roll, a barrage of green plasma. Torpedoes streaked past the starboard side, missing them by mere meters. The shockwave rattled the ship to its core, blowing out the lighting on the lower decks and sending emergency klaxons blaring. I can't outmaneuver them in this bathtub for long, Rossi grunted, wrestling with the manual flight yoke. I'm dropping altitude, we're going to hug the deck. The Nightingale broke through the cloud cover, revealing the absolute devastation of Xylar Prime's capital city below. It was a sprawling metropolis of towering glass spires and elegant curving architecture, now reduced to a jagged landscape of burning craters and collapsing skyscrapers. Thick columns of black smoke choked the air. Weaver pinged the surface. Harrison ordered, find the largest concentration of coalition life signs. Scanning. I have it, Weaver yelled. Grid Alpha 9. It's the Grand Plaza in front of the Planetary Assembly Building. It's packed, thousands of wounded, but Doc, the KLN ground forces are only 2 clicks away and closing fast. It's a slaughterhouse down there. Set us down right in the middle of it, Harrison commanded. Doc, there's no landing pad big enough, Rossi protested. Then make one, David. Crush whatever is in the way. With a roar of its retro rockets, the Nightingale swept low over the burning city. It sheared the top off a shattered crystal spire, showering the streets below with glass. KLN anti-air batteries tracked them, painting the hull with laser targeting beams, but Rossi flew the massive ship like a nimble fighter jet, weaving between the monolithic structures. They approached the Grand Plaza. It was a scene straight out of Dante's Inferno. Thousands of alien soldiers, blue-skinned Zalari, reptilian Vorn, and towering four-armed Draconians were huddled in the massive square, surrounded by the moans of the dying. They were looking up at the sky, waiting for the death blow from the KLN bombers. Instead, they saw the brilliant white hull of the Nightingale, adorned with a massive glowing red cross, descending through the smoke like an avenging angel. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical shriek. The ship slammed into the marble-paved plaza, the immense weight cracking the stone and crushing abandoned military vehicles beneath its struts. Dust and debris billowed out in a massive shockwave before the engines even fully spooled down. Harrison hit the ship wide. Intercom. All medical personnel, this is the chief medical officer. We are boots on the ground. We have incoming hostiles and we have 10,000 patients who need our help. Open the bay doors. Deploy the triage tents. We don't leave until every last one of them is treated, or we are dead. Go, go, go. The massive cargo ramps of the Nightingale lowered, hitting the ground with heavy thuds. Outpoured humanity, not space marines in powered armor, not diplomats in sharp suits, but men and women in blood-stained scrubs, carrying medkits, portable generators, and anti-grav stretchers. The alien soldiers in the plaza watched in stunned disbelief. They had seen the coalition fleet abandon them. They had accepted their deaths. And yet this single unarmed human ship had dropped directly into the Crossfire. To stand with them, the plaza descended into organized chaos within minutes. The Mercy Hounds, as the 47th Combat Surgical Hospital was known, operated with terrifying efficiency. They established a massive perimeter of inflatable triage tents around the ship. Floodlights sliced through the smoke, illuminating the grisly reality of the war zone. Sergeant Thomas "Tom" O'Connor, head of the Nightingale's small military police detail, led a team of 30 lightly armed humans. They weren't combat infantry. Their job was usually breaking up bar fights on shore leave or guarding medical supplies. Now, they were the only line of defense between the hospital and the advancing Kalan army. Set up the barricades. Using the rubble, O'Connell bellowed, hauling a heavy plasma repeater onto the hood of a wrecked civilian speeder. I want overlapping fields of fire. If it isn't carrying a stretcher, you put a hole in it. Inside the main triage tent, the air was thick with the copper scent of alien blood and the sharp tang of antiseptic. Harrison was up to his elbows in the chest cavity of a worn heavy infantryman, frantically trying to clamp a ruptured artery. "He's crashing," Evelyn yelled, monitoring the alien's wildly fluctuating vitals. "His biology is sulfur-based. Standard coagulants aren't working. Get me the thermal cauterizer and a synthetic vascular graft." Harrison snapped, his hand steady, despite the literal ground shaking beneath them from distant artillery impacts. "I didn't come all the way down here to watch him bleed out on my table." With brutal precision, Harrison seared the artery shut and grafted the synthetic tubing. The Vorn's breathing stabilized. Harrison stepped back, wiping a mixture of sweat and alien blood from his forehead. "Next patient. Bring them in." A Zalari officer, missing his left arm and heavily bandaged, stumbled up to Harrison. He looked at the human doctor with wide, unblinking eyes. Why are you here?" the alien rasped through a translation collar. "The Coalition declared Xyler Prime lost. You are a minor auxiliary race. You should have fled. We don't leave our wounded behind," Harrison said, simply, snapping off his bloody gloves and pulling on a fresh pair. "Sit down. Let me look at that stump." "You do not understand," the Zalari pleaded, gripping Harrison's arm. "The Kalan Empire does not take prisoners. They do not respect non-combatants. When they reach this plaza, they will slaughter everyone. You have condemned yourselves. Let them try." Harrison growled. Outside, the perimeter was failing. The distant rumble of artillery had been replaced by the high-pitched whine of Kalan repulsor tanks and the heavy, rhythmic thud of mechanized infantry boots. Sergeant O'Connor peered through the optics of his rifle. Emerging from the smoke at the far end of the avenue were the Kalan vanguard. They were terrifying 8 tall behemoths, clad in thick black-powered armor, carrying energy weapons that could vaporize a man in a single shot. Behind them floated 3 massive siege tanks, their primary cannons glowing with lethal intent. Doc O'Connor's voice crackled over the radio in Harrison's earpiece. "We've got company. A whole lot of it. They're forming up at the edge of the plaza. They outgun us 100 to 1. Harrison stepped out of the surgical tent, his boots crunching on the glass-strewn ground. He walked past the rows of wounded, past the frantic nurses, and up to the barricade where O'Connor and his men were aiming their pitifully small weapons at the approaching doom. A harsh, digitized voice boomed across the plaza, amplified by the Kalan tanks. It spoke in standard galactic common. "Attention, human vessel. You are in violation of Kalan conquest protocols. The beings you harbor are enemies of the Empire. Cease your activities, surrender. The wounded for execution, and you will be granted a swift death. Defy us and you will be burned to ash. O'Connor looked back at Harrison. Orders, Doc. We can hold them off for maybe 2 minutes. Before they overrun us. Harrison looked at the massive black war machines. He thought about the cowardice of the Coalition fleet safe in their slip space tunnels. He thought about the millions of civilians huddled in the ruins behind them. A cold, furious fire ignited in his chest. O'Connor, Harrison said, his voice carrying over the dead silence of the plaza. Patch my comms into their frequency. Done, O'Connor said. Tapping his wrist console, Harrison took a deep breath, standing tall. He didn't have armor. He didn't have a weapon. He had a blood-soaked white coat and a badge bearing a red cross. This is Dr. Harrison Miller, Chief Medical Officer of the United Nations Space Command's 47th Combat Surgical Hospital. Harrison's voice echoed through the ruins, booming back at the Kalan Army. We are an unarmed medical unit. We are claiming this plaza as a universal medical sanctuary under the Articles of the Geneva Conventions. There was a pause. The Kalan commander's voice returned, laced with metallic amusement. Your conventions hold no power here. Human, we recognize no sanctuary. Lower your weapons. I wasn't asking for your recognition. Harrison fired back, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated human defiance. I'm giving you a warning. We have broadcast our coordinates unencrypted across all known comm channels. Every species, every empire, every civilization in the galaxy is currently watching this feed. You fire on this hospital, you murder doctors and nurses treating the wounded, and you will show the entire universe exactly what you are. Harrison paused, letting the silence stretch, his gaze locked onto the lead tank. If you cross this line, Harrison continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper that somehow carried immense weight, you won't just be fighting the Coalition anymore. You will awaken humanity. And I promise you, you do not want to see what happens when we take off the white coats. So either step back or pull the trigger and see what humanity does to monsters. The silence in the Grand Plaza of Xyler Prime was heavy enough to crush bone. For 10 agonizing seconds, the broadcast of Dr. Harrison Miller's ultimatum hung in the smoke-choked air. Millions of miles away, on thousands of worlds, the galaxy watched the raw feed of a lone, unarmed human doctor standing in the path of the most feared mechanized army in the cosmos. Then the Kalan Sea tank's external speakers crackled with a sound that chilled the blood of every alien soldier huddled behind the triage barricades. It was a low, grating, synthesized laugh. Humanity is a fledgling parasite on the galactic stage. The Kalan warlord's voice boomed, dripping with absolute contempt. You have no claws. You have no fangs. You have only arrogance. We care nothing for the eyes of a cowardly galaxy. Let them watch you burn. All units open fire. Leave nothing alive. The main cannon of the lead siege tank flared with a blinding, incandescent blue light. Get down, Sergeant Thomas, O'Connell roared, tackling Harrison to the shattered marble pavement just as the tank fired. A hyperaccelerated bolt of plasma the size of a city bus tore across the plaza, aimed directly at the Nightingale's central fuselage. But Captain David Rossi hadn't spent his life flying into the teeth of hurricanes, and orbital debris fields just to let his ship be swatted out of the sky. From the bridge, Rossi slammed his fist onto the emergency containment console, rerouting the fusion reactor output directly into the micrometeoroid deflector array. Brace for feedback. The plasma bolt hit not the ship, but an invisible hemispherical dome that snapped into existence around the entire plaza. The impact was apocalyptic. Kinetic barrier designed to gently nudge microscopic space dust away from the ship during warp transit was never meant to take a point-blank hit from a capital-grade siege weapon. The shield caught the plasma, dispersing the energy outward in a blinding web of crackling purple lightning that spider-webbed across the sky. The sheer concussive force, however, bled through the shockwave, threw O'Connor, Harrison, and the barricade guards off their feet. Triage tents violently flapped and strained against their carbon fiber tethers. Dust rained down in thick, suffocating sheets. Status Rossi. Harrison yelled into his comms, scrambling back up and brushing pulverized marble from his bloody coat. The deflector array is screaming. Doc. Rossi's voice was frantic over the radio, accompanied by the blaring of damage control alarms. That was one shot. If they fire a synchronized volley, the barrier will shatter like cheap glass. But the Kalan commander wasn't stupid. Seeing the energy shield holding against raw plasma, he adapted instantly. Heavy tanks ceased their firing sequence. Instead, the massive 8 tall Kalan infantry, clad in their impenetrable black power armor, began to march forward. They're walking through it, Lieutenant Jonathan Weaver yelled from his tactical station, his voice echoing over the general comms. The deflector only stops high velocity energy and projectiles. Slow moving physical mass can pass right through the threshold. O'Connor chambered around in his heavy repeater. Hold the line. Aim for the joints in their armor. Suppressing fire, the 30 men and women of the Nightingale's military police detail unleashed a hail of armor-piercing rounds. The bullets sparked and pinged uselessly against the Kalan's heavy plating. A Kalan shock trooper stepped through the shimmering edge of the deflector shield, raised a heavy rotary blaster, and returned fire. 2 human MPs were instantly vaporized, leaving nothing behind but smoking craters in the marble. We need to fall back to the ship's cargo bay, O'Connor shouted, grabbing Harrison by the collar. We can't hold them here. If we move the critical patients, they will die. Harrison snarled, ripping himself out of O'Connor's grip. He turned to the sprawling network of medical tents. Evie, Dr. Carter. We have hostiles inside the wire. Defensive protocols. What the Kalan Empire failed to realize was that human medical equipment designed to save lives in the most extreme conditions imaginable operated on principles of sheer brute force. As the first wave of Kalan shock troopers breached the perimeter and entered the outer triage zone, they expected cowering victims. Instead, they found the mercy hounds. A massive Kalan soldier lumbered into Tent 4, raising his weapon to execute a row of helpless Vorn infantrymen. Suddenly, Dr. William Carter, a burly orthopedic surgeon from Chicago, stepped out from behind a sterilization unit. In his hands, he held an industrial heavy-duty pneumatic bone saw, a device used to cut through the reinforced exoskeletons of Heavy gravity alien species, Carter. Didn't hesitate. With a primal roar he thrust the screaming diamond-tipped saw directly into the unarmored neck joint of the Kalan soldier. The alien let out a gurgling shriek, its dark blood spraying across the stereoplast walls as it collapsed violently to the floor. Outside, Nurse Evelyn Hayes was orchestrating her own brand of hell. Technician Wyatt, the cryostasis. Coolant lines. Uncouple them now. Squad of Kalan infantry charged toward the main surgical pavilion. Wyatt, a young terrified engineering tech, wrenched the master valve on the portable stasis generators. Evelyn grabbed the heavy insulated hose and pointed it at the advancing squad like a fire hose, a pressurized stream of liquid nitrogen sitting at a temperature of -300 degrees F blasted into the Kalan troops. Their advanced power armor designed to withstand the heat of laser fire seized instantly under the flash freezing. Hydraulic joints cracked and the soldiers froze mid-stride, trapped in agonizing icy tombs. O'Connor didn't waste the opportunity. He shattered their frozen armor with a single well-placed frag grenade. Keep them away from the wounded, Harrison ordered, sprinting back to his surgical table where a Zalari general lay, half conscious, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. For every Kalan they brought down with desperate, improvised weaponry, 3 more stepped through the fading kinetic shield. The human perimeter was shrinking rapidly, compressed into a tight circle around the Nightingale's primary landing strut. The heavy thud of boots signaled the arrival of the Kalan warlord himself. He stepped through the shield, standing a full head taller than his troops, his armor adorned with the skulls of conquered species. He leveled a massive hand cannon directly at O'Connor. A red beam of light punched through O'Connor's shoulder. The sergeant spun completely around, his weapon flying from his hands, and collapsed hard onto the blood-slicked marble. O'Connor, Harrison yelled. Warlord chuckled, a horrific metallic sound, and aimed his weapon at Harrison's chest. Your tricks are exhausted, human. You have delayed the inevitable, but you have not changed it. Die knowing your defiance meant nothing. Harrison stood tall over the operating table, placing his body squarely between the warlord's gun and the wounded Zalari general. He took a slow, deep breath, his eyes locked on the black visor of the alien conqueror. He didn't blink. He didn't tremble. I told you, Harrison said, his voice cold and unwavering. I warned you about what would happen if you crossed that line. A bluff to the end. The warlord sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. Above them, the sky didn't just burn, it shattered. The silence gripping the grand plaza of Xyler Prime was heavy, a suffocating blanket woven from ash and terrified breaths. For 10 agonizing seconds, the broadcast of Dr. Harrison Miller's ultimatum hung heavily in the smoke-choked, highly toxic alien air. Millions of miles away, on thousands of worlds, the entire galaxy watched the raw feat of a lone, unarmed human. He was standing squarely in the path of the absolute most feared and brutal mechanized army in the known cosmos. Then the Kalan siege tank's external speakers crackled with a horrific sound that chilled the blood of every alien soldier. It was a low, grating, synthesized laugh that echoed off the shattered marble columns and the broken, burning glass spires. Humanity is a fledgling parasite on the galactic stage. The Kalan warlord's voice boomed, dripping with absolute, unfiltered, venomous contempt. You have no claws, you have no fangs, and you have only arrogance to shield you from your inevitable doom. We care nothing for the cowardly eyes of a pathetic galaxy. Let them watch you burn to ash. Right here. All units, open fire upon the medical encampment immediately and ensure that you leave absolutely nothing alive in this plaza. The main cannon of the lead siege tank flared violently with a blinding, incandescent blue light that blinded the defenders. Get down right now, Sergeant Thomas O'Connor roared, loudly, tackling Harrison forcefully to the shattered, blood-stained marble pavement below. A hyperaccelerated bolt of plasma the size of a city bus tore across the plaza, aimed directly at the ship. But Captain David Rossi had not spent his entire life flying into the dangerous teeth of deadly orbital debris fields. He did not fly through hell just to let his pristine medical frigate be casually swatted out of the sky. From the bridge, Rossi slammed his heavy fist directly onto the glowing emergency containment console with a desperate, primal scream, rerouting the fusion reactor output directly into the micrometeoroid deflector array immediately. So brace yourselves for the inevitable energetic feedback. The plasma bolt hit not the ship, but an invisible hemispherical dome that snapped into existence around the grand plaza. The resulting impact was completely apocalyptic, shaking the very foundations of the shattered city and deafening everyone on the ground. The kinetic barrier was designed only to gently nudge microscopic space dust away from the ship during dangerous warp transit. It was never meant to take a point-blank direct hit from a heavily weaponized capital-grade alien sea plasma cannon device. The shield caught the plasma, dispersing the furious energy outward in a blinding web of dangerously crackling purple lightning storms. This magnificent energy storm spiderwebbed across the dark, polluted sky, illuminating the horrific devastation of the completely ruined alien metropolis. The sheer concussive force, however, bled directly through the invisible wall, throwing O'Connor, Harrison, and the barricade guards backward violently. The temporary triage tents violently flapped and strained hard against their reinforced carbon fiber tethers as the massive shockwave washed over. Thick, choking dust rained down in heavy, suffocating sheets, temporarily blinding the exhausted defenders and coating the medical equipment completely. Status report, Rossi. Harrison yelled frantically into his earpiece comms, scrambling back up and brushing pulverized marble from his coat. The deflector array is screaming loudly. Duck. Rossi's voice was totally frantic over the static field, completely unreliable emergency radio channel. His panicked words were accompanied by the terrifying blaring sounds of multiple automated damage control alarms echoing on the bridge. That was one single shot, and if they fire a synchronized volley, the barrier will shatter like incredibly cheap glass. But the incredibly ruthless Kalan commander was certainly not a fool, and he adapted instantly to the changing battlefield conditions. Seeing the glowing energy shield barely holding against the raw plasma blast, the heavy tanks ceased their automated firing sequence. Instead, the massive 8FD tall Kalan infantry troops, clad heavily in their totally impenetrable black power armor, began to march forward. They are walking right through it without any issue, Lieutenant Jonathan Weaver yelled loudly from his heavily damaged tactical station. His terrified voice echoed loudly over the general comms, warning the medical personnel of the impending, totally unavoidable ground assault. The deflector only stops high-velocity energy and projectiles, while slow-moving physical mass can easily pass right through the glowing threshold. O'Connor quickly chambered a fresh round in his heavy military issue plasma repeater, gritting his teeth against the searing, persistent pain. Hold the line immediately. Aim directly for the exposed joints in their heavy armor. Lay down continuous, heavy, suppressing fire. The 30 brave men and women of the Nightingale's military police detail unleashed a massive hail of armor-piercing kinetic rounds. The heavy bullets sparked brightly and pinged completely uselessly against the incredibly thick, highly advanced plating of the Kalan invaders. We definitely need to fall back to the ship's cargo bay immediately, O'Connor shouted, grabbing Harrison violently by the collar. We absolutely cannot hold them back here for much longer, he screamed loudly, his rough voice breaking under crushing pressure. If we move the critical patients right now, they will certainly die, Harrison snarled, ripping himself out of O'Connor's grip. He turned swiftly to the sprawling network of temporary medical tents, his eyes completely wide with pure, unadulterated, desperate fury. Dr. Carter, we have armed hostiles inside the wire right now, so you must initiate our secondary defensive protocols immediately. What the invading Kalan Empire had completely failed to realize was that advanced human medical equipment operated on brute force, designed meticulously to save precious lives in the absolute most extreme conditions imaginable. These heavy tools easily became deadly weapons as the first wave of alien shock troopers breached the fragile perimeter. They aggressively entered the outer, highly vulnerable triage zone. They anticipated finding terrified, cowering medical staff begging for mercy, but instead they encountered the absolute fury of the humans. Dr. William Carter, a highly burly orthopedic surgeon hailing from Chicago, confidently stepped out from behind a heavy sterilization unit. In his large, steady hands he firmly held an industrial, heavy-duty pneumatic bone saw that hummed with terrifying, deeply vibrating power. Carter did not hesitate for a single second, and with a primal roar he violently thrust the screaming diamond-tipped saw, the deadly blade bit directly into the completely unarmored, highly vulnerable neck joint of the totally surprised Kalan assault soldier. Outside the tent, Nurse Evelyn Hayes was actively orchestrating her very own brilliant, incredibly deadly brand of absolute battlefield hell. She violently sprayed highly pressurized liquid nitrogen from the stasis cooling lines directly onto the heavily armored advancing Kalan infantry. Their highly advanced power armor seized instantly under flash freezing, totally trapping the massive alien soldiers in agonizing, inescapable icy tombs. The fragile human defensive perimeter was shrinking incredibly rapidly, aggressively compressed into a tight, highly desperate circle around the Nightingale. The heavy, rhythmic thud of massive metal boots clearly signaled the terrifying arrival of the incredibly ruthless Kalan warlord himself. He slowly leveled a massive, highly destructive plasma hand cannon directly at O'Connor's heavily armored, rapidly Heaving, completely exhausted human. Chest, a blinding red beam violently. Punch directly through O'Connor's shoulder, instantly shattering the composite armor and dropping the brave man. The monstrous warlord chuckled, lightly, producing a horrific, deeply metallic sound, and aimed his deadly weapon directly at Harrison's chest. Your pathetic tricks are completely exhausted, human. You have slightly delayed the inevitable, but you certainly have not changed anything. Harrison stood totally tall over the operating table, bravely placing his fragile body squarely between the massive warlord and patience. I warned you about what would happen, Harrison whispered coldly, exactly as the dark, smoke-filled alien sky suddenly shattered completely. A low, incredibly powerful baritone vibration deeply rattled the teeth in Harrison's skull as hundreds of brilliant artificial suns ignited. A massive, incredibly terrifying human fleet utilized violent Alcubierre drives to violently rip directly into the upper planetary atmosphere simultaneously. Leading the massive formation was a heavy super dreadnought, so absolutely gigantic it totally blotted out the burning alien sun above. The human fleet absolutely did not bother with warning shots, choosing instead to unleash total, unadulterated hell upon the invaders. Massive telephone pole-sized rods of depleted uranium rained furiously from the sky, hitting the Kalan rear guard with devastating apocalyptic force. Totally horrific impact vaporized the entire alien artillery line in a massive, earth-shattering series of deafening, blinding kinetic blasts. The terrified Kalan warlord stumbled backward, awkwardly, his arrogant bravado entirely stripped away as thousands of armored drop pods descended. Elite human orbital drop shock troopers sprinted out, rapidly unleashing a totally devastating hail of heavy, armor-piercing, kinetic magnetic slugs. Harrison brutally swung a heavy metallic oxygen cylinder directly at the totally distracted warlord, loudly snapping the massive alien's wrist. 3 heavily armored human marines violently tackled the screaming warlord, firmly pressing their extremely hot rifle muzzles against his skull. A sleek, heavily armed naval gunship landed gracefully in the ruined plaza, and Fleet Admiral Winston Cole quickly stepped out. He slowly walked through the absolutely shattered remains of the previously beautiful city, respectfully approaching the blood-soaked, totally exhausted Doctor. The Galactic Coalition cowardly demanded we return this airspace, but we aggressively claimed this entire world as a human protectorate. Cole confidently faced a hovering recording drone broadcasting his deeply authoritative, incredibly menacing voice across every single known galactic frequency. If any alien empire ever dares to threaten our dedicated medical personnel again, we will definitely burn your worlds. Harrison let out a remarkably long, totally exhausted breath, looking proudly at his surviving medical staff and the rescued aliens. All right, people. The heavily armed cavalry has finally arrived, but we still have an incredibly massive job left to finish. Harrison loudly clapped his blood-stained hands together firmly, his incredibly resilient voice echoing powerfully across the completely secured, ruined plaza. I have a critically wounded general suffering from a ruptured spleen on table 3, so let us resume saving lives. The dedicated mercy hounds bravely returned to their incredibly bloody operating tables having permanently changed the entire galaxy. Forever today, the brutal universe finally learned that incredibly terrifying, absolutely undeniable truth: you must never, ever shoot at dedicated human medics. And that is how the Mercy Hounds proved that humanity's greatest weapon isn't our warships but our unbreakable will to protect the vulnerable. The Galactic Coalition learned that day that human compassion is fiercely guarded by human wrath. If this story of courage, defiance, and ultimate victory got your blood pumping, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans. Sound off in the comments. What would you have done in Dr. Miller's shoes? Until next time, stay stellar and GT. Hi, my name is Tran Truong, the owner and manager of Palace Truong's Snort. After watching the video, when the intergalactic fleet retreated, the human medics walked right into the Crossfire _HFY. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the courage of the medics choosing to move toward danger while everyone else was trying to escape it. They weren't fighting for glory or victory, they were trying to save lives, even in the middle of chaos. I think that's what gave the story such a strong emotional impact. Sometimes humanity looks strongest not in battle but in compassion. I also think the story quietly reminds us that bravery can take many forms. Some people protect others with weapons, while others do it with care, sacrifice, and refusing to leave someone behind. In real life, even small acts of helping others during difficult moments can matter more than we realize. Do you think the other species truly understood human courage after witnessing that? And which moment in the story stayed with you the longest? Thanks for spending time with Palace Truths today. If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment and maybe like or subscribe for more HFY sci-fi stories like this.